It's The Executive Edge with Sue Firth. The podcast that gives you an edge in life and business with practical skills that you can apply to achieve and maintain success.
Welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Executive Edge. Now this is the podcast for skills in life and business, and I am Sue Firth, and today I have a brilliant guest. Now this is Alan Lazaros. Alan, it's a real pleasure having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. I can sense your enthusiasm. I can tell you've done some research. We had a great little call right before this, before we hit recording, so I'm excited. Thank you so much. I do not take it lightly to speak into the lives of other people. Podcasts I started listening to 9 years ago after a car accident I had that we'll probably get into, but they really helped me reorient and change the trajectory of my life. So I really respect and admire it, and I do not take it lightly to be here. So thank you.
Oh, that's really great of you. Thank you. Do you know, though, I've always felt that podcasts are a little bit like a mini audiobook. You know, it's a real opportunity to be able to hear something. And what you're looking for, I think, and I'm saying this to our audience while we're talking, is you're looking for 2 or 3 nuggets. And those are the nuggets that just get a light bulb or that just resonate with you, or that somewhere in your head and heart you just think to yourself, that is interesting. So let's get started about you. Tell me about you. I know you have a really great life story, but I can appreciate the fact that you know, I'm never going to be able to do justice to listening to the whole thing, but I would absolutely love to know more. You tell me about you.
Okay, so I mentioned to you that it'll be challenging. So I usually started off with, I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36. I look very young. I'm 35 years old, and looking young has helped my business career tremendously. No, it has not. But I think long term it'll be a good thing. But anyway, so I'm 35, and I'm going to try to condense 35 years into really 5 minutes here. So that's going to be a hell of a challenge, honestly. But so I'll get right into it. And the first thing before I actually get right into it is I didn't understand any of this to the extent that I do now. And I know I'll understand it even more at 36 than I do at 35, but I understand it at 35 way more than I did, particularly when I was going through it. So my life started with adversity, and again, didn't understand that at the time, but now I do. So my father passed away in a car accident when he was 28 years old. His name was John McCorkle. My last name is actually McCorkle, not Lazaros. Lazaros is my stepfather's last name. So John McCorkle was part of a large Irish Catholic family. So my mom and papa, my mom's from Ireland, and they had 6 J's. So it was Jim, Joe, John, Jane, Joan, Jeanette.
Wow. Yeah.
And so John was my dad. Yeah. And when he passed away, my stepfather came into the picture from age 3 to 14, my years. And I had an older sister who was 6. My mom was 31 at the time, and she was a stay-at-home mom. And then my stepfather came into the picture. And then we became the Lazaroses. Now, the Lazaroses, when we were becoming the Lazaroses, we kind of didn't associate much with the McCorkles. I think unconsciously just trying to be the Lazaroses.
You move away.
Yep, exactly.
Give them a time.
Yeah, so 14 was the hardest year of my life. And from 3 to 14, I kind of playfully refer to that part of my life as boats and BS. My stepdad was the hunter, fisher. We had motorcycle, snowmobiles, ski trips. This is also the late 90s, early 2000s, the 90s in particular. He worked for a company called AGFA, hospitalcomputers.com bubble. The economy was really booming. So we were upper middle class, doing very well. We had a yacht, we had apartment buildings, that kind of thing. Dreamcast, Xbox, early Christmas presents. But my mom and stepdad did not get along. So behind the scenes, things weren't great. And that's the most polite way I can possibly put it on a public medium. I mean, you guys can read between the lines. Now, 14 years old comes, stepdad leaves, takes his entire extended family with him. I have since not seen a single or talked to a single one of them, except for my stepdad. I did speak with a little bit on Facebook Messenger. Now, he also took 90% of the income with him. So I went from sort of upper middle class, Xbox, Dreamcast, video games, doing fairly well, to now we get free lunch at school because our income is so low. I shop at Salvation Army now. My mom trades in her BMW for a little Honda Civic. Now, we're not going to starve by any means, but it was definitely a different life. And my sister at that same time moved out. Same time, 14, my mom and her sister, my Aunt Sandy, get in a fight. And my Aunt Sandy ostracizes us from that side of the family. And I've seen one member of that side of the family, 8 years later. So I didn't realize this until my 30s. I started doing some therapy, rewatching the movie of my own life, so to speak. And I now realize that by the time I'm 14 years old, I kind of lost 3 families.
Yeah, you did. Massive loss there, Rolly, wasn't there? And massive change, which doesn't really do justice just by using those words. It's
wild. And I actually have since asked my therapist, her name's Carol, like, where am I at on this whole trauma thing? And I've found out, I think intuitively I already knew, but she's like, most I've ever seen. And there's a lot I can't unpack publicly. And it wasn't all bad. There was some good. But here's the thing. Became kind of the man of the house, saved my family. I didn't know how to react. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do. And I now realize this is my trauma response. Work harder, aim higher, get smarter. And I know a lot of type A achievers who did that. When life is painful, what do? Work harder, aim higher, get smarter. And so as far as trauma responses go, I would say that's one of the better ones. So I got straight A's through all of high school. I didn't know how I was going to go to college because I wanted to go to WPI, which is Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I want to be an engineer, and it was $50,000 a year back then. So when my stepdad left, I was like, how am I going to do this? I got as much scholarships and financial aid as I possibly could. I got in, I got my computer engineering degree. I stayed for my master's in business, and then I was off to the races in corporate. Now I'm coming off being a broke high school kid and a broke college student. And then all of a sudden, 21st century computer engineer with an MBA over here, just sought after for days. I mean, I'm making more money. So I went from 65 to 85, 85 to 105, 105 to 125, and then I make it to nearly 200. So I capped at like 180 before I left corporate. I worked for a bunch of different companies. iRobot, Sensata Technologies, which used to be Texas Instruments, Oz Development, Tyco Safety Products, Simplex Grinnell, which I guess is kind of the same company. And then I eventually landed at a company called Cognex. Cognex sells industrial automation equipment all across the world. They do machine vision, so kind of like the vision of robots. And I was an inside sales engineer, and then I got promoted to outside sales. And I managed a territory. I was Vermont, I was Connecticut, and I was Western Mass. And I made lots and lots and lots of money. Didn't have a mortgage, didn't have a family. I had a beautiful girlfriend named Courtney. We lived together on a lake. It was only $500 for the rent. I was used to living scarce, so I didn't need much. So I paid off $84,000 worth of debt. Yeah, I paid off $84,000 worth of debt in a single year, my college debt. I had $150,000 in a Vanguard account with all different tech companies, because now I realize this is weird, but I kind of knew technology and what would win. So I was just awesome. I invested a lot in Cognex as well. And I was off to the races. And I just decided to get wealthy. And I know how cocky that might sound to some people, but that was my plan. And then everything changed. So that's when I got in my car accident. So I'm up in New Hampshire, my little cousin. I told you this would be a short story. It's really not. My bad. So I'm up in New Hampshire, my little cousin. We're not partying. We're not drinking, nothing like that. Driving to TGI Fridays. I look down at the GPS. And then I look up, I'm on the wrong side of the road. This was the winter in 2015. Yep. That the snowbanks were covering the signs. So there was a yield sign I missed. I was supposed to yield. I didn't. I end up on the wrong side of the road. And I look up, and what I saw was what I thought was a Mack truck. Big, huge, bright lights. And I thought for sure, this is it. This is the end. And for anyone who's had that moment, death of a loved one, death of a pet, mortality moment of self, thinking you're going to die, like actually thinking you're going to die, though. It can't be, oh, I might have died. It has to be, I actually thought. And so that was my existential quarter life crisis, because so fortunately, 2 things saved my life. One, I bought a 2004 Volkswagen Passat in $5,000 cash because I just didn't care about material things. I just wanted to be wealthy. Because to me, that was the polar opposite of after my stepdad left. So I was like, all right, I'm going to invest all my money and I'm just going to buy this car. And I used to call this car the Tank. This is a German engineered heavy steel trap of a car, and it totally saved my life. So thank you, Volkswagen. Number 2 is it wasn't.
They don't crumple.
They don't crumple. They didn't at all. It's totally saved my life. Seriously. So if I was in like my mom's Honda Civic or something like that, there's no way that would have worked.
So. Yep. Yeah, I get it completely.
Yep. So now I love the heavier cars, so I stick with certain companies. But anyways, so the other thing is it wasn't a Mack truck. It was a lift kitted pickup truck. Because if it was a Mack truck, it was like one of those lift-kitted pickup trucks. There's a lot of those in New Hampshire. He hurt his knee on the airbag. I hurt my face in the airbag. So physically, we were okay. Both airbags did deploy. But that was my quarter-life existential crisis of physically, I was fine, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was completely shattered because my dad died when he was 28 in a car accident. I've seen pictures of his car, and I see pictures of my car. They don't look very different. And so for me, this was my holy crap. Yeah, wake up call.
Absolutely.
So a lot of people talk about a midlife crisis, and I'm very grateful that I had my wake up call younger. And at the end of the day, the very last thing to wrap up here is now it's obvious. I didn't know this at the time, but prior to 26, I was very goal oriented. I was very intelligent. I was very competent. I was very confident externally. I was improvement oriented and achievement oriented, but I wasn't self-improvement oriented. I wasn't self-reflective. I wasn't personal growth, personal development. So I flipped the script. I was successful and unfulfilled. So then I was like, you know what? Fulfillment's the answer. Forget success. Worst idea ever. Second worst idea ever, I guess. So then I went all the way past broke. I liquidated all my assets. I started my own company. And now I was super fulfilled and not successful. Which just sucks almost as much, Sue. Almost as much. Yeah. And then now I'm very grateful 9 years later to be both successful and fulfilled. And I want my life now to be an amplified version of what it is. But I think that's kind of the journey we all go through, some faster than others. I have one 24-year-old client who's way ahead of where I was. But at the end of the day, I do think that's universal. Like some people are successful and deeply unfulfilled. Other people are super fulfilled, but quite frankly, not very successful in the economy. And then some people are super successful and fulfilled, but they don't want to work 14 hours a day to sustain it. And so those are my three types of clients. And I try to help everyone get to bucket 3, which is you're successful, you're fulfilled, your career is in alignment with who you actually are, not who you thought you should be. And you just want to amplify it. And so, yeah, that's my story.
I think that's brilliant. And thank you so much for doing that justice. I think there's probably several things in there which strike me hard, and not just as a psychologist, although that little bit of me would like to just unpack one thing in there. I think without a doubt, when you go through particular trauma, and I'm thinking now more about that stage when you were 14, there is no doubt whatsoever that one of the things trauma does to you is it wires you very fast into, okay, what do I have to do here? Because I've got no choice. I've got to survive. There's a part of you, especially at that age, which isn't yet mature enough to be able to wallow in misery and think to yourself, for months on end that I'm now going to get depressed. There's like a trigger survival mechanism, which I think you go into, which prevents you from being able to think enough or feel enough. And I think the other thing, which unfortunately was in place for a lot of young people and even in our 20s or 30s, is that culturally we wire in such a strong expectation that other people matter, that in the critical years of when you should have been able to think about yourself, you were also having to think about other people to the degree where you had to go out, earn money, look after them and so forth. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not surprised, therefore, that really you turned into the driven demon that you did, because what else are you going to do? You can't just come to a halt. You didn't get that luxury. But equally, it means, as you so beautifully expressed, there isn't time to process something. There isn't time to sit down and work out, do you know what, I'm in pain, or I need some help, or I'm not even happy. And I think this is part of the difficulty I see, is somebody who's an exec, they're very senior, they're really successful by most people's standards, burn out because they thought they knew what they were doing it for, but they never actually sat down and worked out the person who they're doing it for. It was often a father or someone else. This is what seems to get wired in. So I say this really respectfully. I'm not the least bit surprised that you had to pull all of that lot up to a halt. And do you know what? If you hadn't done, look at it this way. You could have ended up burning out, and that wouldn't have been very good quality nor anything really to say for it. So, the good news is, heaven forbid you ever have to go through something as big as that car accident, but at least it made you think.
It definitely made me think. And the truth is, I feel like I would have come to that truth eventually. It wouldn't maybe have been so abruptly. Because, and I think we all can, people ask me all the time, well, do you think that I can transform my life like you did? Because I mean, it was drastic. I mean, I quit drinking. I had high school friends and college friends and corporate friends, and I became this personal development junkie. I read every book I could get my hands on. I was fitness fanatic. I just worked on myself literally every day, to the point where I spent all my money on books and courses and all this stuff. And I started my own company, and I was on social media and all this stuff. And people ask me, like, can I do that too? You can. And they're like, well, how do I do it without a car accident? It's like, honestly, it's a duality. You're not going to have as drastic of a shift as maybe I did, and nor should you manufacture a car accident or anything like that. But you can ask yourself the existential questions. You can ask yourself, what do I regret? I think regret is the best teacher. The second best teacher is fulfillment. I think all of us, alignment is in the dance between regret and fulfillment. I mean, if we were just honest with ourselves about our regrets, I mean, you would change your whole trajectory. And so for anyone who is an executive, middle or upper, most people, by their standards, you're really successful, and they envy and look up to you, but they also believe that money would solve their problems. And truth be told, I did too, until I had more than enough money. And then it was like, okay, this is solving a lot of it, but it's not what I thought it would be. It never is.
No, it doesn't fill something inside here. And I know I'm pointing to my own sort of empty stomach, if you like, and no one can see this, but it doesn't fill your heart. It doesn't fill that part of your body which just seems to need. And that connection with what it is that you want is vital. So sorry, carry on.
No, that's well said. And thinking that is going to, here's the thing, there's so much utility in it. Being successful in your career is I think a third of the equation. I think health is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and I think health is by far the most important. You don't have your health, you have nothing else. And I took my health for granted. I wish I hadn't. Okay. After 26, I turned that around, which is awesome. But anyways, the second one is wealth. How you earn it, how much you earn, is that increasing or decreasing? And then where you invest it. And then love, intimate relationship, family, friends, colleagues, clients, mentors, mentees. Like, do you get to surround yourself with the people that you adore? Do you get to connect with people where you feel an authentic sense of belonging, not by being someone you're not? And I think in the 20th century, there was a lot of this, and I didn't experience it as much as others because I was still a kid in the 20th centuries. But I feel like there was, like, you have your work persona and then you have your home persona. And I truly, I've analyzed life my whole life. I don't know if I've always been that way, but I'm pretty sure I've always been super curious. And I had mentors at iRobot and all these different companies. And I would look and go, do I want that? Marriage in particular scared the hell out of me because most marriages seemed awful to me, but I also know that's where I grew up. But anyways, so I would look at these people and I realized something. I said, the executives that I worked with at these big tech companies, they're either their true self at work or their true self at home. And it's very fascinating. So are you more fulfilled at home or are you more fulfilled at work? Because I know some people, and I've coached now, so I'm coming up on my 8,000th hour of podcasting, speaking, coaching, and training. And I say that because I look so young, and it's important to know I'm not just talking, because leading by example is everything. These issues that you think you have, if you're not a clinician or you're not a coach, they're not you issues. These are human issues. But the extent to which you have them vary in frequency, intensity, density, and duration. And so everyone struggles with self-doubt to some extent. For me, it's much lower. For most executive, it's probably lower. But everyone struggles with these universal things. And so for example, fulfillment, everyone struggles with fulfillment. There's no one you can ask and say 0 to 10, how fulfilled are you? And they're going to say, 12 out of 10. I'm the most fulfilled human on the planet. But what they can say is I'm the most fulfilled I've ever been. That's rare. That's usually the first question I ask in coaching is how fulfilled are you from 0 to 10? 10 is the most fulfilled you've ever been. 0 is the least fulfilled you've ever been. Usually they say 8, almost always.
Yeah, funny that. Yeah.
And I say, okay, when was it a 10? That's where the gold is. they start describing this chapter. We've all had a chapter in our life where we were just dialed in. We were on fire. We were living the dream. We were expanding. We were growing. It was challenging, but we were in it. And that's where your purpose lives. That's where your passion and your purpose and your profit are all aligned. And rather than some motivational quip, it's really, to me, the dance between regret and fulfillment. And if you can be honest with that, the problem is we're often not honest with it.
Or we don't ask the questions in the first place. Right. This is the story.
Because we're afraid of the answers. And that's why small talk is so ubiquitous. I can't stand small talk. But I mean, why don't we talk about the real stuff, right? It's because we're afraid of it.
But also, unfortunately, culturally, you find that people aren't receptive sometimes. So I can have a deep conversation for only 10 minutes. I don't need to have it for 2 hours. But I can have a very meaningful conversation with somebody where I ask them most genuinely, how are you? How have you been? You and I talked last year. I know that we talked about X, Y, or Z. I would really know how, I want to know how you got on with that. And then they usually thank me for remembering or something similar. And then we go into it. And we may only have a 10-minute if they're fine or they're well or they did something. And I go, that's brilliant. You know where I am, if there's anything I can do, and so forth. I don't have to have 2 hours, but I love the fact that I had something meaningful as a connection. Sometimes instead I find people are such hedonists or lightweight that at the end of the day they really don't want to have these brave or sensible or introspective conversations. They don't want to challenge life. They don't want to ask this of themselves because it's too deep. What does that even mean? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's code for I'm not courageous enough to look at my own potential inadequacies because I'm deeply fearful I can't transform them.
So let's just leave them alone. Yeah.
And honestly, that's what the car accident did, is it forced me to look at all of the neglect. Drank too much and too often. I'm still hanging out with kids that I grew up with that maybe aren't what's best for me. I'm the only one in my friend circle who seems to have huge dreams. That's alarming. What is that about? And I've come to realize a lot of that is very unique. And now I surround myself with all people who have big dreams, right? So, and no wonder why I never felt like I fit in. You don't know yourself. You're not, and I wasn't courageous enough to filter people out, right? So, someone comes to you and I grew up around a lot of people that were full of it. That's just my truth. I call it the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Just people talking a lot of talk, very little walk, right? And I just didn't have the courage to call it out. And so you don't filter people out. You just surround yourself with these kind of fake, confident, egotistical people that are going nowhere and they know it, but they're too afraid to look at it. And they're not awful people by any means, but they're certainly not humble, courageous, and vulnerable. And then
even potentially they may not be as successful as they could be because they're not prepared to challenge that status quo. And sometimes you're going to have to do that.
And they're definitely not. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these people that I'm referring to are too scared to be vulnerable enough to say, I kind of suck at XYZ and I'm going to work on improving that. That's the irony of life, is until you admit, I mean, now I coach so many people. It's my youngest is 16 and my oldest is 63. And I have 26 people on my roster now. And so I've got a eclectic, all different countries, all different backgrounds, all different sexes, male, female, all over the world, different industries, different businesses, some of them career, some business, obviously the 16-year-old. So I have this wild range of statistical sample set. And I also have data because we track habits, so I can see what works and what doesn't work. But ultimately, it comes down, I honestly think that 90% of success comes down to courage. The problem is what we're afraid of is different. I was a social coward. I was not a competence coward. I think there's two types of courage. I think there's competence courage, which is apply to the job, apply to the school, write the resume, write the cover letter, do the LinkedIn, put yourself out there, show up to the interview. That was always super easy for me. And I know some of the people listening, executives, will resonate with that. That's easy. But standing up and shield bumping someone who's full of it, not as easy.
No.
And so over here, you have the social cowards like myself who feel unlovable, and they feel like they don't fit in easily, and they feel like And this is the quote: "You're afraid that all of you is not enough, or you're afraid that all of you is too much." I was afraid that all of me was too much. So I shrunk to try to fit in.
To fit.
And then behind the scenes, I was, let's go, full self. And then I'd go back into social situations and I'd shrink again. And then deep down, the people who are afraid that all of them is not enough are triggered and insecure around someone who has a lot of self-belief and who puts in the work behind the scenes and who studies and that kind of thing.
Completely. But I suppose what's also coming to mind, though, is it takes time to do this. And what I mean is, during those formative years between, say, 10 and 20, you're doing a lot of growing. You're doing a lot of changing and adoption and understanding of habits, thoughts, processes. Much of that is influenced by what we've now referred to as comparisonitis. You know, what is someone else doing? What should I copy? What's right? And the teachers that we have and whether or not they're good, bad, and indifferent. And there's just so much coming at you. And obviously now peer pressure and the social media thing, which obviously didn't exist when I was younger. And you talk about the fact that you look young at 36. You know, I'm 59, and I'd like to say I still look young, but I can't actually say that. Thanks. But
you look younger.
You know what I mean?
You look younger than your age, for sure. Yeah.
He's got to say that, everyone, but never mind. I still think that's true. But, you know, what I mean is it takes a while to mature. It takes either something cataclysmic, which is what happened to you, or it takes somebody who's really significant that you love, who turns around and says to you, do you know what? You're being an idiot.
Yeah.
Or you need to change this. And that can come from someone you admire. It can come from a mentor. But it's often a sign of maturity that it seems to happen usually when we go on the hunt for it, which is what we've already talked about, or when someone's brave enough to call us out on it. And so I really liked the fact that I've mentioned this before you came on, that your company is called, or the website is called nextleveluniverse.com, or LLU for short. But I love this that you've put up there. I'm about heart-driven, no BS approach to what it takes to get to the next level. And I love that because it takes a while to drop that BS. It takes a while to be okay in your own skin. Yeah. And we don't get a lot of help with that. The school doesn't teach you the skill to be able to drop that.
The hardest thing, I'm convinced, is to be yourself. I'm a computer engineer. Yeah. I think there's four modalities of thinking. You know, there's numbers, there's pictures and images, there's words and concepts, and there's energy. I'm numbers. I think in statistics. I think in graphs. And you know, if your friend says, "Hey, do I look fat?" and you say yes, like, you're in trouble, right? But that's what my brain says. It says, statistically speaking, yeah. Don't say that, right? So I have this weird relationship with myself where I'm the way I think is hyper. Because growing up, I thought everyone was irrational and lazy, and I now realize I'm hyper rational and ridiculously hardworking, which was hard to give myself because honestly, I don't think I'm that hardworking.
No.
And my business partner's like, dude, you work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Like, what do you mean you're not hardworking? It's like, dude, I'm trying to put more on the court. Like, this is not not that impressive to me.
Not less.
Yeah, right. But that's also the modality of who I am. And so the hardest thing in the world is to be yourself, because I like the analogy of the metaphor of like dogs. They're all dogs, but there's yellow labs and there's, you know, chihuahuas and there's, I don't know, dog breeds, but I don't think chihuahuas should be labs, and I don't think labs should be chihuahuas. And I think human beings, we crave belonging and love so much, myself included, that we just mold ourselves to the culture and to the people and to the leaders and the alphas of whatever tribe you're in. And honestly, that you have to unwire that stuff, and you better unwire that stuff quick, especially if you had an upbringing that was like mine, because you know, if I let the leader should be the person who has the highest awareness, the highest self-belief, the highest self-worth, the highest fulfillment, the highest competence, the highest skills, the highest vision, and the highest standards. I was too much of a coward to actually lead. And so in my friend groups, I kind of led, but not really. And I kind of let them lead. And then when they take me astray, I follow. And then I regret it. And then when I'm alone, I'm back to my own alignment. That is just being cowardly. Like, own if you're not enough, own it. And ironically, you'll become enough. That's the fascinating thing. If you're too much, own it. Like some of the stuff I've even said on this podcast, I was too cowardly to say in the past. Like I don't struggle with self-doubt that much. I feel like I can do most of what I want in this life, in my career. I've exercised every day for 2.25 years with my girlfriend. That stuff has always come easy, but what doesn't come easy is standing up to bullies, setting and honoring clear boundaries, making sure that when I call people out when they're wildly irrational, and I actually say, like, I think you're inaccurate, I think you're wrong. I'll give you one tiny example. I had this person in my life who's like, well, nowadays the only way to make money is real estate. And I'm literally like, technology companies, internet, had you considered maybe, by the way, this is 21st century. If that was ever not true, it's now, right? It's like now. Digital Absolutely. Real estate is the future. But I didn't have the courage to say, hey, that's inaccurate. Right? I was afraid I was being mean, when in reality, I didn't have self-respect because I just was like, oh, yeah, real estate's the only way.
Okay. Yeah. Whatever.
And I told myself it's not worth it, when in reality, I was just a coward from my childhood. And I never stood up to maybe my stepdad or whatever, right? So.
Yeah, and I get that. But I think we've also understood, really, like I said, at 14, it's really difficult to do that. And I think what you've learned since is
at
definitely
35, it's difficult to do that.
It is. It absolutely is. So I'm interested, what's next for you then? Because you've done this amazing podcast, which has got, over 1,700 episodes, which I laughed before we came on air because, I see myself as being suitably proud at doing whatever it was, 187, I think.
That's good.
So we've been doing one a week for 187 weeks, but I have to admit, that's not on par with 1,700. So, what's next for you? What's your next goal?
Next goal, the high level dream. And again, like I said, I used to not be courageous enough to say this, but the real dream is to have, and I have this written in my spreadsheet where I track my habits. It's to build the most successful and positively impactful holistic self-improvement company in history. And we have 21 departments. We have a 21-person team. We're still in the very infancy of our business. We're only 7 years old, so we're still a toddler. And I've always been a big dreamer. The past was painful. The present was painful. I just went into the future and dreamed big. And so, but I'm not also very practical. Like I don't like set big goals and then go to the beach, right? A lot of people do. And so what's next for us? We do quarterly group coaching every quarter. We do a live event every year. We're hosting retreats soon. We do a monthly meetup every month. We have a book club we do every week. For me, the main focus is business coaching, though. Like I want to coach executives that are in one of those 3 buckets we talked about. Like if you're a business owner and you are fulfilled and you're passionate and it's your purpose, but you're not profitable, I've got you. If you're someone who's super successful but deeply unfulfilled, I've also got you. We've got to reinvent yourself and then rebuild your business from the ground up in a way that is aligned. Or maybe you take yourself out of the business and lead. So for me, it's business leadership and effective communication. Those are the 3 things I practice. Quite frankly, that's why I'm here. Number 1, I'm here to serve. Bring self-improvement. I used to say I want self-improvement to spread like COVID. I don't say that anymore. Now I say, how COVID spread from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64 to 128? I want that to happen with self-improvement. And so I'm here to serve, number 1. Number 2, I'm here to practice my craft. When you ask me questions, I can find ways to take this big brain I have that I've been trying to figure out my whole life, and communicate things that I know other people haven't ever understood. Ever since I was a kid, I remember I was the ridiculous kid who was like proving the textbook wrong. I remember the whole class was laughing at me, and I went and did a proof with one of the smarter teachers, and I proved it, and everyone was, you think you're smarter than the textbook. It's like, listen, the textbook was made by someone who is just wrong, and that's okay. Like I'm more accurate. So I'm trying to take this brain and make it practical for emotionally driven, heart-driven people, because I want to see them win in the economy. Whereas I know some people that are very, very smart that win in the economy that are actually very toxic.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think all of us know that. So how can people find you? So obviously, they'd like to know more about you. They'd like to get involved in the group coaching or speak to you themselves or one of your other coaches. How can they find you? So presumably, this is the website, which would be the first port of call. And I know that you're definitely on LinkedIn.
Yes. So, yeah, thank you. So LinkedIn, so we only use 3 platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me on the professional front. My email is alan@nextleveluniverse.com, spelled just like it sounds. And then our website is nextleveluniverse.com, spelled just like it sounds. And the podcast is Next Level University. Learn how to level up your health, wealth, life, and love. Self-improvement in your pocket from anywhere on the planet, completely free every single day. 1% improvement over time compounds into some wild results. And 9 years ago, I started improving myself rather than just my goals. And it's transformed everything. I mean, it's awesome. And again, it's also brutal, but you know what I'm saying. And
yeah, I hear you. No, I hear you, and completely. And I do understand that. But living your truth, and living what it is that you're good at is really one of the reasons why you're doing those 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Because for those of us who are lucky enough to have found that combination between feeling fulfilled and earning from it, are the ones who basically don't find this scary to deliver those kind of hours, as long as it's not doing any harm. Meaning we're not missing out on saying someone else we love, or we're not missing out doing stuff that we also enjoy, for example, having fun. So I think the beauty is when you do get that alignment right, it just takes off. And that's the success principles in action.
And then inevitably we get cocky and then we go outside of alignment. And then we got to reinvent ourselves.
It can be true. Yeah. And then you have to tweak it, But I'll leave you with this as food for thought. I once got told something that was remarkably simple in its way, in its principle. And that is that a plane that takes off from, just a normal place is never going to do the same route twice. Even though it has to go to the same destination, it never actually does the same route twice. And all you end up doing is recognizing that plane is still going to get there, but your job is to just tweak it, is to just keep doing course correction till it gets to where it needs to get to.
Yeah,
and I found that really fascinating from the point of view that, it just reminded me, it doesn't have to be the same as somebody else's journey. It doesn't have to be compared. It doesn't have to be about other people. It's just about you. And at the end of the day, we all started as you, meaning a person. And so your own story, your own journey is the important thing we're talking about today. So, Alan, I really have to thank you. I think your background story is fantastic. And hey, we have to own it. You wouldn't be the person you are without it. So, credit to you. And I'm so pleased that you've turned it into something so meaningful for people. That in itself will be infectious. I completely guarantee.
Sue, thank you. You hit the nail on the head on the end there, where I'll end with this. I think there's 2 ways to think about life. And I think we usually are just born into an environment that picks it for us. Most people, statistically speaking, again, don't villainize me for my math thinking, but if you guess you want to, go ahead. But statistically speaking, most people, I think, have this mentality where life is supposed to be great, and whenever it's not, they think something's wrong with themselves or the world. I don't have that.
Good point.
I grew up, and I think life is suffering. And every time you're not suffering, that's amazing. And so despite the suffering, you can build a life that's meaningful. So you hit the nail on the head with meaning. Like at the end of the day, that's what you should orient your world around, is meaning. And as a psychologist, I know you've studied Viktor Frankl and Adlerian psychology and Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and all the different philosophies of life. And if you believe that life is supposed to be great, and every time it's not, there's something wrong with the world or wrong with you, you're in some serious trouble, in my opinion. I think that life is inherently challenging. And I think despite that, you can grow and contribute in a meaningful way. And I really believe that to be true. And that's the advantage that came from my adversity, is just being oriented more accurately than other people.
I really appreciated Alan coming onto the show today. I think he did a lovely job. He talked all about himself, but in a very humble way, really. And obviously what he had been through, which I'm sure you picked up and listened to, it was a level of trauma that clearly could have left its mark. It could have kept him down. It could have completely destroyed him if he'd let it. The beauty being he fought back. I think whether you simply do that by default or by design, at the end of the day, it gets you through. And when you then come through to the other side, that is the time when you need to process. And what he took as an opportunity on the back of his near-fatal collision was the time, the attention, and the self-awareness to work out, okay, what's going on here? What do I like? What do I not like? And I love that because I think that bravery is important. You know, each of us tend to carry on with our lives and, hey, I really hope that it's all positive and golden in yours. But there are times when it isn't. And I think this kind of a podcast, when you listen to it, is very motivational. So I do hope you were inspired by that. We get some really great guests, don't we? So we're on all of the major platforms. And I very much look forward to being in touch again very soon. Bye for now.